There we go. I think that's everybody in.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'm Corey Mason, a director at Turner & Townsend within our sustainability practice. I'm part of your delivery partner team and I'm in the role of project support and assurance workstream lead. On the call today, we have other members of the delivery partner, so colleagues from PwC and Arup, and the delivery agent, colleagues from Salix. This is one of a series of SHDF grant recipient group engagement sessions, and these sessions are here to provide you with information and support to help you to deliver your SHDF Wave 2.1 project. Today, we'll cover project monitoring, reporting, audit, and assurance. The format of today will be a 30-minute presentation, and that will be followed by a question panel related to today's content. The panel will last up to 30 minutes. So as we go along through the presentation, please add your questions into the chat, and these will be directed to the Q&A panel at the end. Your cameras and mics have been disabled, and they'll be re-enabled once the question panel begins. The slides and recording will be made available after the event in a follow-up email. And I'll now hand over to Russell Irwin, your delivery partner, support and remediation lead. Over to you, Russell.
Thank you very much, Corey. Good afternoon, everyone. So this sounds like a bit of a mouthful to get through in one session, but I'm sure you'll see how all of this ties together to help you identify any risks to your delivery and successfully provide the necessary outputs that are needed to validate the outcomes of your projects. So I'll have a quick look at the agenda. So we'll go through some of the processes that are involved in this and talk through some of the inputs that are needed from yourselves and from your SPOC as part of this process. Next slide, please. So it's essential that you embed good project management practices in your delivery. This allows both you and us to track your progress against your agreed baseline. That gives us as delivery partner visibility of your project and allows us to identify how best to support you, ideally by spotting where issues may arise. So a key factor in project monitoring is the ability to identify, track and manage risks and issues and making sure they are given the right amount of priority. So fundamentally, we're all motivated to do this work so we can improve the lives of the people who need this work, and good project management gives us the confidence that what we're delivering has been done to the right quality, and we increase that confidence through good record keeping. Equally, it's as important, it's to need to keep all of the interested parties up to date on your progress, ensuring that the commitments that have been given at the highest levels can be reported on in a timely manner. And lastly, we have the process in place to track spend and give transparency as to how it's been allocated and utilised, giving assurance that error and the potential misuse of funds is being effectively scrutinised. Now, all of these processes are time-bound, and we need to work together to get that data that we need into the systems each month that allows all of the other tasks to flow from that. So what does that monthly process look like? So as you've all gone through the first monthly submission already, so most of you should be familiar with the priority task of completing your monthly report template and uploading that onto the .gov.uk portal. So this is a target that's to be completed by the 10th working day. So it's essentially you set up your own internal process working back from that day, and ideally with a little bit of float to get it in on time. Even more important for those leads amongst you where you have a number of consortium members who also need to feed into your project report, that they can feed in the information through to allow you to consolidate your report. And once that report is received in the system, it undergoes a number of checks behind the scenes. Your SPOC will use the information that you've submitted to have a focused discussion with you to explore any queries. We'll gather more background information where needed and make sure your report on the activity achieved to date is reflective of where you actually are. This discussion will focus on key areas of activity within your project that link to the milestones and KPIs and we'll unpack any issues or barriers that you may be experiencing. And then we'll look forward and we'll talk about what's needed to get your project where it needs to be. So between you establishing a level of confidence that both you and the SPOC feel is reflective and achievable, and we'll capture that in a delivery report. And should there be any underperformance against your baseline, we can work with you to identify the actions needed to put it back on track. In the event there's need for additional support, we can make recommendations to the delivery agent to support that and put it in place. And we'll talk about that a bit later on. So the engagement meetings, for us, it's one of the most important aspects of this process, and it allows us to get to know you and your project in more detail. It helps us to build that relationship between you and your allocated SPOC. But we need to be clear that the SPOC that is allocated to a project is not to an individual consortia member. So all meetings would be scheduled with the lead of the consortia. It's the lead partner's responsibility to receive, distribute that information that's discussed with the SPOC. So that should be part of your consortia meeting schedules and your other governance arrangements. So SPOC allocations are underway, and you're being asked to provide us with your availability over the next couple of weeks to book in your first meetings. And in the background, the SPOCs are reviewing all of the information as it becomes available to us. The initial engagement meeting is an opportunity for you to be introduced to your SPOC and discuss scheme's delivery progress. The key point to highlight is that you need to go over your project baseline, which had already been updated as part of your signing of the GFA. So you start off on the right point. And with key aspects to be discussed are the risks, issues, or gaps in planning, as well as any updates that you have on your project teams. Next slide there, please, Joe. So once we get into the cycle of ongoing meetings, after the kickoff meeting, you'll fall into this cycle that you'll agree between you and the SPOC. Attendees at that meeting will be the SPOC and initially a SPOC coordinator to take notes and actions. And we'll also be looking to get the regional leads sort of part of this process ongoing. And occasionally further down the line, you may find representatives from fraud specialist teams or from the Salix delivery agent, who will attend to sort of get a better overview of where the projects are at a certain point in time. But generally, the discussion on those meetings will revolve around current progress. So please come prepared, ideally with your position statement, which will give an overview that includes all the details of your project plan and key material risks and issues. But you might need more information on property types, property numbers, routes to market, and PAS 2035 as appropriate. So we need to talk about risk assessments, and most of you will be familiar with the need to produce a risk assessment for these type of projects. And the SPOC will take the information that you've submitted along with any supporting detail from your monthly meetings and use this to document key risk factors. And all of this feeds into the overall delivery assessment process that we produce in order to inform the department of the status of your individual project, as well as collectively for the funding allocation overall. So as we've already touched on, monthly reporting, the cycle that we go through, the discussion thereafter, these are heavily dependent upon your submission being received on time. So the reporting processes can't run until after the 10th working day. So please do make all efforts to get your reports in on time and make sure the data template is filled out as per the criteria set. So there's less likelihood of a delay in getting it accepted. So it goes into the DMS by the portal. And it's our understanding that the training for this process has already been delivered, but if you are experiencing difficulty, the SPOC will assist you where possible. So finally, on the right there, just to highlight that once the monthly operational reporting is complete, there will still be a requirement to complete project close down reporting, and this will be supported by our colleagues from within the delivery partner team, who will carry out the independent assurances of grant spend. So what's in the report? So the content you should all be familiar with. So this is just a list of all of the items that are on the tabs. that you need to fill in. So it's the various items that you need to go through each month and populate the information that's relative. Any gaps in information you can talk through with a Spark to identify any blockages that you may be experiencing. Next slide, Joe. So as we touched on earlier, the data flow process and how it's received in the monthly reports. And all this goes together to form a delivery report. And a key part of the monitoring process is to be able to identify early warning signs. So this may be where it's affecting project performance, and we can put in place actions to address this. And there are a range of actions that are available to us in order to support you. So these may include just maintaining the regular cadence of meetings or increasing these in the short term to get more detailed information and track some actions. But if there is a need to bring in more specialist advice, we can schedule technical officers with expertise in particular areas to attend the meetings and work these through with you. Or if needed, we can put together a more intense package of support using industry specialists. In more extreme cases, it may be a need to have a remediation plan to bring the project back in line, and we work with you to develop that and obtain the necessary approvals to put that in place. Or where there is an ongoing issue that can't be resolved operationally, then it may be a need to have an escalatory meeting with Salix in the department to work through any blockages with your senior leadership. Next slide, please, Joe. So, key part of this monitoring process is tracking the financials. So this is just a reminder that there are a range of financial assessments that will be undertaken. So this will be alongside the operational discussions with your SPOC. But these will be covered in more detail in the payment processes and financial reporting session that is coming along. So building on the back of the importance of good project management, similarly, audit and assurance play an essential role in validating all of your delivery activity. So finances are limited, costs need to be monitored and verified, and not forgetting that this is public money which needs to be spent on public need. This process gives confidence to government to continue to invest in these types of programs where the benefits can be quantified and realised. So I'm sure you've all considered this as part of your internal controls that support your commercial setup at some point or other. So making sure you have your own teams carry out a proportion of site inspections and obtaining evidence for your own audit purposes. So similarly, there's a requirement for us as delivery partner to conduct a sample inspections and carry out a deep dive into site activity and follow the data trail through from start to finish. So there is a thread of activity that flows through in support of identifying any errors, non-compliance, and ensuring fraud is not allowed to go unchallenged. So most of our information gathering will be done remotely, but there will be a request for evidence from you periodically in support of this process, and we can look at some examples on the next slide. So the need to support these evidence checks is incorporated into the conditions that are set out in your GFA. And some examples are shown here of what those evidence checks could look like. But one of the key areas that we will look at with the SPOC is the delivery and quality. And this is one of the most important areas to ensure that there are no legacy defects that will impact the homes of the people who need it most, those who were trying to improve the performance of the homes. But we will look at how contracts have been procured, making sure that the works are delivered in keeping with the scheme rules and that monies have been paid out correctly. Also, we may be looking at things like the evidence of lodgement with the Trustmark data warehouse. We've touched on the DCA through the slides already, but it's something we need to come back to because it's a key process that we will use to track risk and get ahead of risk, ideally, by being focused on what the next milestones are and making sure that we're acting early to do that work. The SPOC will give you a regular monthly report that should support you in having the necessary conversations. Now, be that amongst your delivery partners, your consortium members, or even with your internal stakeholders of your own organisations. So watch out for that report and make sure that you use it to its best advantage. Next slide, please, Joe. This is just a reminder of the KPIs that are set out. So these are the ones that the DCA uses to track and monitor, and these are as set out in your grant funding agreement. So this is why it's essential that we see progression with each of these on a monthly basis so that we can have an informed understanding of how your project is going. So this is just a reminder of the flow chart. So as your group engagement sessions complete, your SPOC allocation is underway. The SPOCs are reviewing the data already in the background, and this will help us produce our initial understanding of what the delivery confidence level is. And then gradually, once we've had the conversations with you, that will go into your delivery report. We'll track the risk, report that risk profile, and then we'll go back into completing the monthly cycle again. But just to see the component parts of the monthly assessment, so you've got your monthly data template that comes in, you've got the meeting outputs from your conversations with the SPOC, and also we'll factor in any other correspondence or known issues that either you may have flagged to us or have come to our attention. We'll filter all that through the delivery conference assessment process, and then you'll get your outcome report, which will be issued by the SPOC. So all of this process comes to a conclusion with a score against the scheme, the confidence score. So in real terms, that SPOC assessment will put all that information in to produce this, and then we'll build that picture up over the previous 1 or 2 months. And then depending on what that score is and how consistent that score stays, that will trigger a range of options. But generally, it's a light touch where progress is good, or where progress may have dipped slightly over a longer period. We'll look to give a more intensive approach, which could be a remediation plan. So remember, these are done on a case-by-case basis. So those are the ones that we would hope to see, the greens, the ambers. Next slide, please, Joe. But obviously where progress is dipping, obviously we're moving into an amber, red, or a red. There's more options that we may need to look at to bring those projects back on track. Next slide, please, Joe. You just move it on there, Joe. So we've talked about the project baselines, and we need to make sure that we fix this point in time in order to measure against that. So we'll take the updated position that you've most recently submitted. We start from there, but we do need to be absolutely sure that this is still an accurate representation, and we'll do that at the first meeting. So this is just the steps that we go through to make sure that we flow that information from the baseline through into the delivery confidence assessment. So we've touched on those items already that make up the component parts. Next slide, please. So lastly, for those projects who've been allocated this additional funding, we'll also be working with you to track this spend and work with you to realise that the improvements from this for your projects. And there are 4 broad areas of improvement that the funding can be used for. That's on the next slide. So you've got smart technologies, you've got energy efficient measures, you've got building information modelling, and you've got innovation products. So actually the housing sector is starting to embrace the need to include more technologies either within residents' homes or to give assurance on system performance, as well as residents' health and well-being, as well as improving the carbon impact of the systems we're installing through having a better understanding of energy usage. So that concludes today's presentation. Can I hand it back to you, Corey?
Thank you very much, Russell. Now, Russell will now be joined by panel members. So we'll have Jack Deadman, we'll have Carlo van der Plank-Jones and Russell back with us again. So the Q&A is related to today's content. If you've got any detailed questions that are related to individual projects, then please do direct these, but direct them to your SPOC and your regional lead, and you should have information on your regional leads available to you now. Please ask questions in the chat function only, and I can see that people have been doing that as we've been going along, so thank you very much for that. I'll raise the questions that are posted in the chat. So what I'll do is invite the author of the question to ask your question directly to the panel. If you separately have any feedback on the content of the session, then please get in touch with us via Kyla. What we'll do at the end of the Q&A is share a quick poll question in the chat, and please answer this if you can. So it's quite a few coming through there. I'm going to start with a nice easy one. We've got Rowena Claydon-Smith. I'll just read this one out myself. So it's please can we have a copy of the slides afterwards? So that's a yes, you can definitely have a copy of the slides afterwards, and we'll make those available to you. Let's go to Ellie next. So Ellie Nathan, you kicked us off with the first question. So it's right and proper to invite you up to ask that. And I think you've got a couple that have come along the way, so feel free to ask both those questions. Ellie, would you like to put your camera on? Okay, so perhaps Ellie isn't able to raise that question herself, so I'm just going to read that out. So Ellie was asking, she made a statement, I was under the impression that a grant drawdown request would be tied to what was reported in the monthly report, and therefore meeting after the report is submitted to discuss the report and the funding request with the monitoring officer seems to conflict with that, especially if we can't meet the monitoring officer in the first 10 working days of each month, which is when we're asked to submit the drawdown request. Did any of the panel members want to do a response to that one? I'd say that's a no. What I have seen coming through. Oh, Carla, I can see you with your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a very similar question. It was asked the session yesterday. They are tied to the grant drawdowns, but it's based on the previous month's upload. So when you're reviewing, once you've submitted that grant drawdown request, I think it was confirmed yesterday that you have to draw that down and make an adjustment for the following month, either an under or over in your next forecast.
Thanks for that, Colin. Okay, so there's a couple also come through from Jules Vickers. Jules, would you like to ask your question or questions to the panel?
Thanks, Corey. I hope you can all hear me. As you were going through that, Russell, I was posting a couple of queries in there about the DCA. So we've got wave one. So familiar with how we're working with the NDOs on wave one. This sounds very different. I think it's a series of concerns, really, and I'm sure you can deal with them. So the DCA process, first of all, I wasn't sure from what you were saying whether it's it's all kind of metric input based and therefore is a kind of a numerical, derives a numerical kind of output from, performance against KPIs, or whether there's a sort of a judgment element based on what the SPOC is sort of seeing and hearing. And if it's anything like the latter, then my another question I had was how you were going to moderate the use of that tool or the use of that rating right across the Wave 2 program. I don't know how many SPOCs you have. So that was just a concern, really. And perhaps because I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about the background of the people who are going to be our SPOCs and what their kind of backgrounds and technical abilities are, because it might be the case that some of the organizations that you've got bidding in for cash have got, really good project management, commercial, contracting, delivery teams who kind of really know what they're doing. And we'd want to make sure we're working with folks who, had a similar level of expertise. So I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how the SPOCs are going to work, the DCA, how the DCA kind of operates, how you get those scores out. Because I can see that escalation. If you're in green and then on phase 1, it's all terrific. But from 2 to 5, you're starting to talk about, increasing the number of meetings, possibly bringing in yet more SMEs. So okay, I would hope those things are really extreme. But maybe you can just tell me a little bit more, because I was worried when you were describing all of that.
Yeah, obviously we don't want to worry about the process, but we need to have a methodology to review your month-on-month performance, so the figures that you're submitting in. So the assessment is partially done on the KPIs and the milestones. So there is a data analysis piece that's done, but also that information has to be discussed between the SPOC and the grant recipient to make sure that it's reflective of what is happening for your project. That's why it's not an automated piece of work that just says your numbers have come out this way, therefore you are in this position. It's got to be, it's nuanced. So yes, it has to be based on discussion to get there, and it's an agreement between you and the SPOC, as this is reflective of where you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very helpful. And who might the SPOCs? What kind of folks have you got who are going to be SPOCs? Are these kind of QSs? Are they PMs?
So we've got a range of technical people from across the delivery partner group. So from ourselves, TNT, and from Arup. So we've got people who are project management background, experienced in delivering very large projects, and a range of different schemes. We have a number of specialists in sustainability and net zero who are familiar with sort of the aspects of what we're trying to achieve with this funding. And we blend that knowledge base across the schemes to make sure that we have the right people allocated to the right project. So where projects are larger or more complex, we obviously have people who have that ability to project manage all of those moving parts. But we also have a range of people who can provide backup support. So we have what we put in place as a regional leads arrangement, where we have more senior people from within the teams who can then jump in and support those SPOCs should there be a need to, and give that level of assurance.
Thanks, Russell, and thanks, Jules. And Jules, I know you had another one before we move on to somebody else. There was something around the agenda for the kickoff. Did you want to ask that one as well?
Oh yeah, thanks, Corey. Yeah, I just thought you probably know already what you want to cover in that kickoff meeting, because all projects will develop differently over time. But at the start, you're going to want some core information, some key information. So, is that something you can circulate? You're going to be circulating soon.
Yeah, so the agenda has been put together, and the agenda is going to be circulated with the meeting invites that are going out. Carlo, have you got the exact agenda to hand?
Yes, I don't have it to hand on screen, but yes, it's going out with the invites. Some went out yesterday, and the rest are going out today to that initial kickoff meeting.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Jules. Thanks, both. Okay. Gary, I could see there was a question from yourself. Gary Upton, would you like to raise that question around the date for the reporting deadline?
Hello all. Yeah, I just wanted clarification on the deadline. I was under the impression it was the 14th of every month, and you were mentioning the 10th today.
10th working day.
10th working day.
10th working day.
Okay, thank you. That's all it was.
That's an easy one, right? Those ones.
Exactly. Thank you.
Gary. Okay, there was another one from Ellie. I don't know if Ellie, you're going to, if you're available to ask the question around the complexity of the process that was described, and if not, I can ask that one for you. Just give you a minute to come on camera and speak. Okay, I'll put that one to the panel as well then. So the comment was that this is becoming quite complex. I hope it all makes sense after a meeting with our SPOC, and that was related to Russell when you were starting to talk through some of the reporting process.
So I can take that one. Obviously, there are a lot of component parts in this process, so we will do everything we can to make sure that these conversations are constructive, but we do need to sort of drill into some of the detail about your projects in order to track that progress. So the data is a key aspect of that, but also we need that real intelligence from on the ground of what's happening with you, what's happening, what's unique to your project. So how your supply chain is operating, how your resident engagement is going. So all of these different things that can affect performance. We obviously want to get under the skin of those items to make sure that the numbers themselves are one aspect of it, but also we can get that narrative to inform sort of the reporting process that assures that you may still be moving forward, but the figures just don't quite show that yet.
Thanks, Russell. And there was one from Alan Moore. Alan, would you like to ask your question? No problem. I'll ask that question to the panel on your behalf. So Alan was asking when the kickoff meetings are starting.
So again, I can take that one. So invites will be coming out to you. Some were sent out yesterday and some are being sent out today. And they should be looking to commence from the 14th of June. So look out for those invites popping into your inboxes shortly.
Just scanning through for questions. Another one from Ellie there. When will the milestone evidence requirements be shared with the projects? It would be good to know what we will be expected to provide in advance.
I can take that one. So obviously we're building up sort of the templates for what that evidence can look like. So we've got some initial ideas. We have to work those through with our colleagues in Salix to make sure that that process for auditing can be sensibly put into systems and tracked, and that it's a realistic requirement of what we're asking you to provide.
Thanks, Russell. John Rattenbury, would you like to raise your question?
So in wave one, we found that occasionally we were issued with a new reporting template on monthly reporting, and that was done without adequate time for us to sensibly send that round to our consortium partners to actually get them to provide the new or adjusted kind of requirements in that. Is in terms of the program planning for this, is there going to be a better lead in to things like that when those kind of changes happen, so that it's, you know, we can kind of manage that better? Or could we have that, please?
Russell.
I'll take that one, Corey. Obviously, I'm aware of the issues that you've raised there, John. Now, it's a conversation we've had with the department about the continuity of information. We're working with the most up-to-date template that we've been issued, and we are seeking sort of clarification on how that change, if it occurs, will flow through the process, because obviously we need to be comfortable that we're briefing our own teams on what's changed, and then we're sensibly getting that information out to you in order to make those changes. So it's not something we have an answer for yet, but it is something we are tracking as we work through this mobilisation phase.
Okay, thanks. I've got another question, but I'll put it in the chat if you want.
Feel free to ask it now, John, it's fine.
Okay, so one of our other experiences was having kind of program level reporting requirements, but then partway through being introduced with SPOC specific reporting requirements, which adds another layer of reporting. Is there going to be a kind of something like that might crop up, and if there is there going to be consistency in terms of the requirements across all of the SPOCs and monitoring? Because I think it was kind of piecemeal in wave one, we found. So some people were having it, some people weren't. And it's just trying to manage the volume of work and reporting that we have to do, particularly when you're managing large consortiums and all the toing and froing you have to do with the partners to get the information. So we're just trying to get a, practical, reasonable kind of level of reporting.
I'll take that one, Corey. So at the moment, we're not envisaging any supplementary reporting from the SPOCs. So we will be using the reporting template as issued. However, if there is a need to move to additional support, at that point, there may be a requirement to provide additional reporting.
Okay, thanks.
We've got one from Daniel Gattenby, going back to the kick-off meetings and the invites. Daniel, would you like to ask that question?
We don't have your volume there, Daniel.
Okay, that's fine. I can ask that for you.
I was going to say I can give the answer. I've seen it pop up in the chat, Daniel. So yeah, my apologies. I should have clarified. So these invites are only for the first 60 phase 1 project kickoff meetings, and as yesterday, phase 2 will happen in July and August. But if you do have any queries on your projects, then please do email your regional lead, as indicated in the slides, and we can get in touch and help you out with any queries you might have before your kickoff meeting.
Okay, and there was one from Sarah Brooke there. Sarah, you were asking regarding the regional lead contacts. Thanks for the slides, but you didn't receive the contact details after the Wednesday meeting. So we did have a bit of a technical glitch when the slides went up. That's now been corrected. So if you go back into the slides now, you should have your lead contact back in there. Lewis Evans, do you want to ask your question? Perhaps we'll come back to that. I think it was something directly possibly to another grant recipient. There are a number of questions that have come through for things that are outside of this session. So we have taken a note of them, and we'll take those. We'll take the points that have been raised related to sort of finance related things, or things that are related to project matters that need to be covered off with regional leads, and we'll direct them to the relevant people within the team. Are there any further questions people wanted to ask as part of this session? I think there's comments coming through around the length of time between award of funding and meetings with SPOCs. We are aware that this is challenging, which is one of the reasons why we've set up the ability for people to contact their regional leads. So if there are things that need to be escalated before you meet with your SPOC, that's the route for you to direct any concerns or queries that you've got. And we do understand that it's, you know, it's a long period of time that's elapsed. Okay. So Joanne Wright, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. Joanne Wright from the Southwest Net Zero Hub. The audit and the assurance process, although we were doing that as part of our projects generally, they've not really been as highlighted as they have in this particular project. What I would like to know is your expectations of that and your touch points. So obviously this is a 2-year project. There are a number of outputs that are required. We haven't received the milestones from you yet. What is the audit process from your point of view? Are you doing it on an annual basis, a quarterly basis? What does that look like? What is the evidence that you're looking for? How are you and how are you managing your assurance process as well? What is your expectations so that we can obviously feed that down to our consortium members?
Jack.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, no, great question, Joanne. Some of that is still in development, but I can give you sort of an overview of kind of how things are working, at least how we're planning it at the moment. So in general, sort of the approach that we'll be taking to audit and assurance will be risk based. So it will be tailored depending on relative risk sort of across the projects and across the grant recipients. So it won't necessarily be, you know, one size fits all, and that's intentional because it depends on the variability of risk and also the controls that each of you as grant recipients are putting in place to manage those risks. But fundamentally, what we'll be looking at is there'll be links through from how you've conducted the fraud risk assessments. So actually the controls that you're putting in place to manage some of those risks. So things like procurement, as Russell touched on earlier, some of the things around sort of non-fraud things, which will be compliance with building standards. And we're just thinking about from each of the grant recipients' perspective, how you are managing those things and what your controls are. We have an idea around sort of good practice in those areas, and we've got an idea of what the evidence requirements will be. We're finalising that at the moment with colleagues in the department and with Salix, but actually as soon as that is ready, we'll be sharing further guidance on it, and we've got a session coming up on fraud and controls specifically on that next week. But largely speaking, it will be as tailored as we can. We'll probably do it on a rolling basis, and the sort of the extent of the work that we have to do over the 2-year period will be driven by risk and previous results. So you'll probably have to bear with us just for a little while longer while we sort of completely define those evidence requirements, but that's it at a principal level. Does that help?
It does, but it puts us in a little bit of a concern with regards to the fact that we have consortium agreements with our consortium. And at this stage, without being able to define what that assurance looks like and that audit process and the evidence required to progress into contractors at risk, it needs to be very generic. Is there a definite defined time frame on when you'll have this information?
I suspect we'll probably have to take that one away, Corey, and come back with a specific answer for you. It is one of our highest priorities. We are progressing it at the moment. We've got a good idea behind the scenes. I think if we could probably come back on that specific point, if that's all right. But we are progressing it as quickly as we can.
Okay.
Corey, you've just gone on mute.
Thanks, Russell. There was one that came through from Rebecca, which has been responded to on the chat, but I just wanted to read that one out aloud just in case anyone else is experiencing the same. So in relation to the sharing of the slides from the session, I know Rebecca's got some issues with her IT system not allowing her to access those slides. If anybody else is also having those issues, then please just have a look in the chat. There'll be a different method of accessing those provided to you. And Adam, I can see you've got your hand up there, waiting patiently.
Oh, Kai, thank you. It's just further to my comment about meeting our SPOC as we're part of phase 2, 6 months into the funding timeline, this funding window. a quarter of the way into the funding window. We won't meet with our SPOC. So there could, so we, you know, we could, our program could have issues that won't be identified until a quarter way into the funding timeline. That must be a very big risk for the successful delivery of the program from your side, I'd have thought. And I'm just wondering whether you could expedite the meeting with the SPOC to give us assurance that we're doing this correctly, and yourselves the same thing. It just seems a peculiarly long time until we have that one-to-one contact, and I'm concerned, to be honest, that it's that long.
Adam, I'm happy to respond to that one. So so we completely understand the concerns that yourself and others might have if you're in that second wave of projects coming through. We understand how, if there are issues that are building up and or you need some responses or decisions to be made or some consultation on decisions, that if you're not getting the input that you need, the impacts that that could have then on your delivery further down the road. If you've got specific queries or specific concerns around your project, please go to your regional lead, because we do want to know. We do want to know if there's something, you know, if there's some change that's happened or there's some uncertainty over something, please flag it with them, because we'll be looking at all of those things that come through, and we'll deal with them on a case-by-case basis. So please do get in touch with the regional lead if you've got some concerns.
Sure, we will definitely do that, but obviously, but we might be hitting issues we don't realise through not understanding the process, which will only be identified a quarter of the way into the funding window, which, you know, could set back putting it on the right course. So just want to make that point. Thank you.
Yeah, we hear that loud and clear, and yeah, please do get in touch with your regional contact. If you're not able to see who that is, then please get in touch with Kyla and we'll come back to you. Okay, are there any questions that people had over the session that I haven't picked out from the chat that were related to the content that you'd really like to ask today? Please drop them into the chat. If there's anything else, I'll just give another minute or so in case somebody's busily typing away there. Okay, so we've got one hand up. Daniel, we can't hear you. Could you drop your question into the chat and then I can read that out for you? Let's just give 1 moment for that to come through. And I'll just give 1 more minute for Daniel or anybody else to drop anything into the chat. Okay, so nothing else has come through. Oh, here we go. Okay, so the one from Daniel was, your process seems to be at odds with the department's payment process. Are you fully aware of the processes we're already undertaking? So we do have a session which is related to the payment processes, so we'll work through that in more detail with yourselves. And we've got a focus team of people that are aware of and working on the payment processes and working closely with the department on those. And Charlotte, your one around digitalisation of funding, would you like to raise that one? Charlotte Tutton.
And some members have digitalisation, some don't have digitalisation. And when we asked where to put this, it was in capital. But obviously, then when we're getting reports from consortium members, we're not actually seeing what proportion of digitalisation versus capital on retrofit measures is being spent. And that's sort of the response I had, but it would be useful in a future iteration of it to have it specifically as a KPI, because currently it's going to get lost in sort of the bulk of capital, and the only sort of places to put it are saying yes or no whether you have it, or on the measures. So conscious that you wouldn't have that information almost until the end of the project, because the only place where it's reflected is in the measures tabs, and you wouldn't have that until the measures are completed. But digitalization happens, you know, throughout the process. So it was just an expression that it should be an additional KPI, because you know it's easy if you're, you know, one project and you have digitalization, but when you have, you know, 9 different people doing digitalization, doing different things with different amounts, you know, we'd almost have to ask for them to report it separately in addition to the report, and it just makes sense for it to be in that report. And I know it's not in the moment, but if it could be included in a future iteration, then that would be really helpful for keeping a track of it.
Did anyone from the panel want to respond? If not, then I will. Take that as no. Thanks for that, Charlotte. So yeah, take your point. And a few of us have got experience of having to, you know, gather all that information in from multiple consortium partners and know how complex it can be to do that. So I think we'll take that as a bit of feedback to the department around the reporting, the monthly report itself in terms of the setup. Thanks. And Sarah, there's one around, can you confirm when the session on the payment processing? I think that's one that we've still got to be scheduled in. Okay, so I think with that, thank you very, very much for your questions today, and thank you for attending it and giving us your time today. There were a couple of queries that dropped out of that for the other sessions, which we'll make sure get passed on to those that are preparing for the other sessions. Yeah, thank you very much for today. Hope you all have a good end to the week. Enjoy your weekends, and the team will see you on the next group calls. Thanks very much, everybody. And with that, we'll close the session.